Anyway, so I'm going to share my screen now and start. That was just my like career pep talk, which I give lots of the like young actors I work with, because almost all of them are reverting to hospo and they hate it. Okay, so I just want to recap that everyone. Here's my screen of what we did. What we've been talking about last week, which is really what do I want and how do I get it? And that being the real core of actor's job. If you didn't already that chapter, like constantly, I always go back to it. I always go back to really thinking about getting to the heart of what a character wants. I also just wanted to refresh what we talked about. Emotion is the result of active doing. So don't feel, do. So the fierce passion to get the money from the other character, to get love from them, to be forgiven by them, to incriminate them, your need as a character to make that happen will cause emotion to happen naturally. So if you are in a relationship scene and you are desperate to get love from the person that you're playing against, if they're not giving it and your need, you've fueled that need in a really committed way, and they're not giving you that love, that emotion will happen because you've set up that need in yourself as the character. Does that make sense to people? So you're never, just this idea that you're never thinking about what am I doing? You're always thinking about what do I want from the other person, or what do I want from the audience or the image or the object. So I wrote here, as an actor, your job is to commit, concentrate, and invest yourself in getting what you or your character wants. And how well you do that reveals your talent. Your talent is in your choices. And if they aren't specific, your acting will be vague. I am absolutely not an actor who subscribes to the idea that acting is a God-given gift that you're born with. If that's the case, it certainly would not be me. Like, if there is one thing that I know that I can do now, it is act. But it wasn't natural. It wasn't something I was given. It was something that I worked for. 90% of it is about, 90% of talent is about working for it and developing technique. And this idea that some people are just born with it, some people have something, that's for sure, but I don't believe it's enough. It might be 10%. Yeah. I thought I'd just quickly read something just to make this idea really clear, because it really is so important, this idea of playing an action. So this is from, I'll show you, this was my acting teacher, Earl Gister, in New York. And he is now passed away, but he was the teacher for some incredibly famous actors, John Turturro and Liev Schreiber, and a whole lot of, I think Philip Seymour Hoffman, like a lot of different actors. He was a teacher. He's also my teacher. And so I thought I'd just read something that I've found useful in terms of this idea of drumming into you the importance of playing an action. So it says, once you become, it's also sort of where we're heading in terms of my technique teaching for the day. So once you're comfortable with the idea of the action, you can further refine it using the how of an action. The how of an action is linked to the who am I. So in The Three Sisters, an actor playing Olga might make an actor playing Natasha feel wrong, but in a gentle way, as gentility is part of who she is. A bully can choose to make another character feel fear in a mocking way, there are infinite ways to make someone loved, such as in a romantic way, in a sexy way, in a brotherly way, in a maternal way, in a spiritual way, or in a teasing way. But so you, as the who am I, can make someone feel stupid in a gentle way, in a brutal way, in a mocking way. You can make someone feel guilty in a dismissive way, or in a caring way, or in a cold, cruel way. The how of the action, along with the action itself, is a prime vehicle for revealing the who am I of your character. So last we dealt with the question as an actor that an actor has to ask is, what do I want? And this week, my little technique tidbit is, who am I? And answering how you go about creating a character, especially in devised work. So I thought seeing as you all watched Unwoman, I thought I'd first give you an idea into the way that I worked on that character. And then in the next page, I'll give you a whole list of stuff to think about, because I think this will definitely tap into you discovering the who am I for your subject in your I&E assessment. So essentially in the I&E assessment, we have made it that we consciously made it that you were not playing yourself, so that you could start to develop some tools of how do I stand in another person's shoes. And certainly there's lots of different techniques and methods for doing that. Sometimes it is about trying them on and seeing what works for you. So in scripted work, the who am I will always come from mining the play for clues. So you're reading the play. My teacher, Earl, the book I showed you, says you have to read a play, recommends reading a play 5 times, and you're reading it in different ways to discover first everything that someone says about your character, or then everything that happens in your relationships. It's like mining for clues. But in devised work, when you don't have a script, what are some things that you can do to start to create a character where you feel like it's a departure from yourself? As I said, I'm like, have had in like Joel's production of Daddy, where he's playing himself, that's probably not my style of theatre, because I need to hide behind a character to be on stage. That it's the way that I can be on stage. I'm not a person who is good at public speaking. I'm not a person who could ever even cope with the idea of doing stand-up comedy. A character for me is really the armor of how I stand on stage in front of people and perform. So character is important to me, and it is the way that I come at acting. It's not to say, you know, some of you might be really confident in that like performance way that Joel is, where he's telling his own stories. But the point of our exercise in terms of this assessment is to look at tools for how to become a character. So I just thought I'd quickly take you through how I did it for what I did for Unwoman. I always find having an image helps. So they could, and I said in the text here, there could be a real person, there could be an actor, there could be someone you know, and that often I don't come in with an image immediately, but it's something that happened time. So in Unwoman, when I offered this kind of stereotypical hippie character, that's when I sort of got my clue into it's too obvious. But is there an image for someone who embodies that mentality, but doesn't have the kind of it's just a bit less stereotypical? And so my image for setting up for coming at Unwoman was she's like a mummy blogger called Constance Hall. Has anyone heard of her?
Yeah, she was on Dancing with the Stars, isn't she?
Yeah,
that's how I know her.
yeah. But like,
Yeah.
she became my image because I don't know if you noticed in the performance, but she loves attention, and she's got a real deep voice. She's pretty Australian, and she has this really kind of like sort of erratic nature that I found physically. I started to base my physical choices on her. So if you go back and you look at Unwoman in part 2, you'll see Mary Helen's made some very, very strong like stillness choices. And I've made some very strong choices of a character that has a very quick inner tempo and can't sit still. And the way that and so part of those choices for me came from having an image, which was her. Sometimes I don't always need a single image. Sometimes I'll have like a physical image for someone, but often the image that I have is about a character's a character's energy more than anything else. And so, yeah, I just throw it out there as like, as you start to work on your subject, you probably maybe met them on Skype, maybe you know them, you've known them before, so they can be your image for the piece. But even though they're they don't necessarily have to be your image. You could have another image to work with that script if you don't know them, or yeah, if you only met them on the phone. I think it's the same as in like the way that you word your action to fire you up. You need to find an image that fires you up in terms of that subject, if it's not the subject. So in the next page, I started to think about some of the things that I think about in developing the who am I. So in physical development, I have a musical background, not in like singing, you know, like musical and dancing, but I play the violin. And so I love to think about a character's inner tempo. And that's really something that's quite an internal decision. So in the Unwoman example of using Constance Hall as my image, I watched a lot of videos that she was posting, and she has a very quick inner tempo. So she never really stops talking, and she's like moving around. She isn't still. So I think in terms of your subject, think about their inner tempo. Make a note for yourself about how they exist. But also I think don't fall into the danger. So when we're talking about all of these things in terms of the who am I, we're talking about the essence of a character. So the essence of a character in their life. So in the context of a lot of you are pitching I&E assessments that are sitting in this world that we're in at the moment in terms of the coronavirus, which I think is great. But just be conscious that think about the character's inner tempo in terms of the essence of character. And then you can also think about it in terms of what's happening at the moment, but if someone is working at a faster inner tempo because they're in anxiety because of the current situation, you also want to think about, is that their natural inner tempo? And you'll probably have a sense of that. You'll have a sense of mine. I also have quite a fast inner tempo, as in my person. But from the last little lecture from Dan, can you sense his? He has a really slow inner tempo. Did you get that? Yeah? Yeah.
Yeah, he's really laid back and just chill.
Yeah, he's got a slow inner tempo. He's Yeah, I don't know. I can't describe it aside from I feel it. And everything about acting is about getting into the body of it. So tempo for me is something that I think about. So in terms of physical development, you also want to think about someone's age and how that might affect their way of moving. Maybe what part of the body that they lead with. Certainly in Unwoman, using that image of Constance Hall as my kind of character creation image, she has a real weighted, grounded hip, sort of pelvic, like kind of, she's in her body as opposed to like sort of fluttering around up here. She's very like in her body. So having that also like coming with that sense. In non-naturalistic work, and especially because we're doing experimentation, sometimes working with bigger gesture as well and discovering a gesture that you might repeat or finding a gesture can be, I don't know, like expressive of a character, but also gesture should not, you shouldn't kind of underestimate the power of a gesture if it's built into a performance. So there are, I've definitely, sorry, my daughter's running in and out, I keep getting distracted. I do have a thing about, I have certain physical gestures that I know that I can rely on that will trigger me emotionally. So there's something in when you're performing a role, you know, like 8 times a week for 5 weeks, and you get to this scene that demands you to cry and you've done it like 46 times already, and that and you know that you're not feeling it that night. So having a physical gesture, you'd be surprised how if you've built into the action of having a physical response, how suddenly the emotions happen. Again, it's a technique around always going to the body first and using the body and the way that the character expresses with their body. So I love gesture and building in gesture to a performance. Animal is something I feel like gets a lot of flack from actors in like doing an animal exercise, but you'd be surprised how many great actors still use it, and that I still think it has its place. So has anyone seen The Godfather? Classic? No? Come on. So Marlon Brando is well known for his use of animals. So in The Godfather, he based his character on a gorilla. And if you go and look at some of his gestures in that, you really see the way that he built that in and how amazing it is. Then there's also, if you've ever watched, and if you haven't, write it down as something to watch, Midnight Cowboy. It's a great film where Dustin Hoffman's character is based on a rat. His name is Ratso as well. So, and the way that he's worked in these kind of ratty, like, behaviors into his character based on an animal. Sometimes I won't always do a physical animal exercise in terms of I won't walk around my house as a gorilla, but sometimes I will just think about it and answer the question for myself in terms of character, like if I was an animal, what would I be? Then in terms of also like looking at your subject, so that's your physical ways of looking at your subject. Yeah, tell me.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I just wanted to quickly ask about when we're talking about physical development. Do you ever use like Laban techniques in your practice? Because sometimes that's helpful.
I do. I love, I call it Laban.
Laban, I don't know how to say it.
Yeah, I call it Laban. I do, yes. But that is a long conversation for another time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I studied Laban in more of a psychological way, in
Yeah.
terms of Laban links to Jungian's character types.
Mhm.
And I did all of them.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
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 Cool.
So,
Just want to know if you use them, basically.
yeah, I absolutely do. I still do, for sure. So then in terms of in terms of this like developing character idea, then I'll also look at my image or my subject or a source material for some ideas about how I might approach a character vocally. So in Unwoman, you definitely can, like, if you went and now watched a video of Constance Hall, you'll know that I have quite, myself as Dana, I have quite a cultivated Australian accent, which means that probably because I have a trained voice as an actor, and also maybe because I trained overseas, I have a more cultivated accent in terms of Australian accent. But in that image that I had using of Constance Hall, she has quite a broad Australian accent, and I just took on elements of it for not for necessarily any reason to serve the play, but to serve me, in terms of I am the kind of actor that needs to feel like I have a veil and that I need to transform as a character. So sometimes I have to make those choices of making choices that are different to myself in order so that I don't feel like myself. So different things like register. Constance Hall has a very like deep pitch and register that I did kind of just look at in being very grounded in that voice. And then also I mean class in the sense of what socioeconomic class they come from, and is that represented in a voice. And yeah, and I included elements of that as well. Emotional development, I always see is like in the Who Am I, is thinking about what your character likes and dislikes, what they love and what they hate. I usually just like through time of like and making I always have a notebook and I just keep a list for myself of things that they love and things that they hate, because it starts to define the Who Am I. We're all defined by what we love and what we hate, what we're passionate about. And the other emotional development thing that we will do in detail on another week is this idea of as ifs. And this is a big acting point of contention, because different acting teachers use it in different ways. But I'll explain how I use it just quickly, in that if I'm coming, so I have an example. So if I'm coming at a character who is far away from me, or has a belief system or a part of their life that is far away from me that I find hard to understand as Dana, then I have to find a way through my own life to understand it. Otherwise I find it hard to get to the depth of. So recently I played in a play the character of Lindy Chamberlain. Do you know Lindy Chamberlain? She's like the Australian woman whose baby got stolen by a dingo. And she is a big believer in God, and she believes that God took her baby for a reason, and that there was good reason behind. I know it's very hard, and there's good reason behind it. And how do I as Dana, who I don't believe in God, and I don't believe that a baby is killed for a reason, how do I play a character who believes those things when I know that fundamentally I don't? And so the way that I do that is coming at the idea as an as if. So in terms of approaching Lindy Chamberlain and her, I knew that I needed to create a kind to have a parallel understanding of what her relationship with God is and her love of God and that unconditional kind of love of God. And so the way that I approached that was to think about my love for my daughter and the expanse of it and the depth of it and that relationship that I have with her. And I transposed that into developing a relationship with God, so that I could place it in the kind of depth that Lindy feels it. But it is, I feel like if people have specific questions about that, and definitely in terms of their subject, like if there's something about your subject that you can't quite kind of understand as yourself, bring it up with me in a conversation. We'll talk specifically about what kind of as if you might be able to use, because often it's about being a little bit, often you need a teacher to guide you in deciding some of those decisions, especially when you're sort of still learning. Definitely with your subject, I really want you to be able to speak out loud this sentence. So my name is, and the world to me is. In the Unwoman video, I'm sure you can sense in my character that my answer to that question as that character is the world to me is a positive one and there for the taking. But not everyone has that same point of view. And knowing what standing in your character and thinking about what the world is to them is a really great kind of way of getting at their essence. And also thinking, and if you think about what yours is as well as a person, then maybe just trying to find some difference to get at like the heart of your subject. I did say at the bottom as well that all of the work you do on character, it's like the same as in devised work, is that it is that iceberg of like all of the character work that you do. If you're writing out a backstory, if you're doing an animal exercise and like slithering around on your floor as a snake, like it's so hard to think how is this making a difference? Is it making a difference? I truly believe that it does. I truly believe the more work that you do on a character, the more kind of base you have to support you when you're in performance. Like the more your physical body and your vocal register reflect an entire person, like a three-dimensional person that is not yourself. Does anyone have questions about it? Does anyone feel like in terms of their subject for the INE assessment, they know how to apply some of those things? Or do you feel confused?
I think it's like taking it from, I'm so overexposed right now. I think it's taking it from like the dot points and the practices and activities and applying that to a real person. Because like you can, I feel like I've done it before, especially like physically, because that's how I usually like to work as an actor. But when it comes to vocal development, I think that those things are more noticeable to me, but I wonder like if someone else in the class was watching, would they be able to pick up on a vocal difference, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even if it's subtle. it doesn't have to be, like, oh, I'm suddenly going to talk in like an Irish accent because I want to be different to myself. It's even just, I think it's even just working quite subtly and specifically just to make those little separations. But certainly vocally is probably something that can be harder. Maybe, I think there probably are lots of singers in the group that might have more sort of vocal experience in doing that, but it is something that I think is just about really listening to the way that someone speaks. And it's not it's not necessarily mimic. You don't want to mimic a person. It's not what I'm talking about, where you're mimicking someone. It's about capturing an essence of the way that that person speaks. And it just comes from listening and practicing and trying things out rhythmically, pitch wise, whatever. Like it really just comes, unfortunately, from practicing. It's not something you can just decide and it changes. It's like that constant practice. Anybody else have questions about this subject, or go for it?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Basically, I just wanted to discuss. So my subject is a man.
Right.
An older man.
Right.
Pardon?
Right. That's awesome.
Yeah. I haven't actually heard his voice yet, or he's going to give me a phone call at the end of this week, so soon. But I think what I'm interested in your opinion of is, if we say, because some of us probably won't get to hear now as we're interviewing, some interviews might be done over email and we might not actually see our character's face in the flesh. So in the fact that we might not have a close relationship to our subject, because obviously if you hear their voice, you'll use that as inspiration. But if you haven't heard their voice, do you just kind of imagine this character and kind of like more, I don't know how to describe it, be more creative in the fact that you don't have something specific to base it off, if that makes sense. So like
you
they
could
didn't hear his voice.
Yeah, you could totally do it in your imagination if you have a mind that works like that.
Yeah.
That's where, for me, I would need to use an image.
Yeah, I'm the same. Like as you said, even basing your character from Unwoman on Constance, is that her name?
Yeah.
That's awesome. So you could have, like, say, this man that I'm speaking to or interviewing, say I don't get a clear kind of, I might not even speak to him, it might all be over
it might be email. Yep.
But could I base him on, like, I don't know, hearing his background, I know he's like a, Aussie larrikin kind of bloke.
Right.
So you could use, I don't know, a TV figure or something like that to kind of use as your inspiration.
Or an actor who does a good
larrikin.
Yep. So you might, depending if you did want to do it as a man, which I think would be fascinating, give it a go. But it doesn't have to be, you could also be like, I'm going to use a female version of that.
I'm a bit as my subject, so he was, just a bit of backstory, he is a central figure in, I don't know if you know, but the Malakuta bushfires that were really just took out the whole town. So he lost his house, everything he owned, but still created a community kind of relief centre for locals and for visitors in the place. So I kind of the subject is kind of him and how he had that strength kind of to bring a community together. Like he had that, I kind of want to do it from that point of view. But I think it's going to be a good challenge in terms of the as if, because like, I don't know, now I'm thinking, I could compare it to something I've lost. Maybe it's a partner or that feeling of grief, I guess, because I've never lost a house, obviously. Is that the kind of process you want us to do? Like,
I think in this situation, it's me giving you some tools.
Yeah.
And you going, okay, what might be useful like I can definitely see for that character that you're talking about, because it's so far away from your physical gender, all of those things, that there's lots of physical and vocal stuff that you could get to. I think that any kind of as if is going to come out of when you actually settle on a script, or when you actually settle on the performance that you're going to do. I think there might be work to do there where you just feel like, I don't get that, like I don't understand that. How can I connect with that idea a little bit more? And then I would say, email me and say I'm having trouble connecting with the idea of God or the idea of loss. And then we could talk about, okay, what would be an as if that you could create?
Awesome. So just unpacking those kind of layers and the as ifs, because there's so many. It's just limitless, isn't it?
It is. And there's also like, I love using in my own work a physical as if. And it's also a choice. So, in a grueling scene, I might have an image that of a knife sticking into my heart, or the body can imagine these physical sensations in itself, and the sort of that feeling comes out in the way that you're expressing it. So I actually sometimes use very kind of sort of I use physical tricks in I give myself physical tricks to react from. Or I feeling sick is one, like when you feel sick in your gut, and speaking from that place. If you really can get into that place of what that feels like and speaking from there, that's also one that I use, a physical as if.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. So I think it's about, once you start to lock down the INE kind of performance in terms of where the script's going and what it's all saying and what you're doing, then I will help you apply little bits of technique that you might need according to what's happening in the script along the way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really a layering kind of thing, and everybody needs something different. So it's just sort of knowing what tools are out there, and then we can start to apply them. But the main thing that you have to apply is going through that idea of my super objective, my objective, and my action. What action am I playing? That's the main kind of thing.
Awesome.
I really quickly just want to go through with you. Oh, hang on. Where did you go? Here we go. I'm going to just share my screen with you. This is something that I want you to do for the week. And I think it would be great if you could do it as part of your assessment. I don't think you need to do it separately. It might end up being in the assessment, or maybe it's all just part of that iceberg of material and it doesn't get pushed up to the top, but maybe it will too. So pataphysics playwriting is just a way of generating content. And because we're not working on the floor in terms of generating content, exercise to generate content at home that you can submit to me that will then perform. So this is looking at this idea of an assembly, which is an alternate play structure. So one of the most powerful, flexible, and extensible of these new structures is the assembly. In its simplest terms, an assembly is a theatrical piece composed of two or more recognizably different texts. This text says, for this one condition automatically subverts any illusion of textual authenticity on which all further representational illusions turn out to be. Anyway, the text source that you can look at for an example is Charles Mead's Iphigenia, which uses Euripides as a framework within which foreign elements replace equivalents of the original. So every element of the piece is still kind of Euripides. That's the base text, is Iphigenia. And then all little bits of the play are replaced with sort of modern what they call interpolations, which is really just a insertion of something modern. It has the same, it's kind of similar in meaning. I'm going to see if I can show it to you. You can look this play up online for free. And there's a couple of moments in it that I really love. So you have, it sticks to the kind of very Greek Euripides in some sections. So here you've got Achilles talking. And then there's going to be a wedding with Iphigenia, who comes in, and you see it says Iphigenia in the coolest, latest American teen fashion enters, and she's accompanied by bridesmaids, into Iphigenia talking to her father, Agamemnon. It's still like it's a Greek tragedy, but she's saying, "Oh, Daddy, I love you, and I love you, sweetheart. I'm excited to be married." And then there's a couple of monologues in here that I love, where the bridesmaids, Clytemnestra comes in, the bridesmaids come in and start talking about bachelorette parties at the Beverly Hills Hotel, and they reserved a suite, but it all still fits into this Greek tragedy as the basis. And it starts to have these different layers of contemporary layers in it, but it's still very non-naturalistic. So I'd really love you to get your subject interviews and start to put together, like piece together a monologue as the main framework, just like Charles Mead has used Euripides' Iphigenia as the framework. It only needs to be like 20 seconds long, whatever. It doesn't have to be long. Maybe it will enter into your assessment, or maybe it becomes part of it. But it's just piecing together little bits of script from that interview into a monologue kind of form. And then I want to see if you can intercut it with other pieces of text. Just to give it, let's try and get out of this like non-naturalistic feeling of naturalistic monologue. Let's try and disrupt the feeling just a little bit. Do you know what I'm saying? And it's an experiment. Like, I'm going to do it too, because I'm working on something at the moment. So I'm going to do it too and just see how it happens. I did originally think that I would get you to use a poem that was reflective of the subject of your interview, but I actually think now I'll open that up and you can use what you like in terms of maybe intercutting something into that monologue of that might just, I don't know, give it some color in some way. I know that it's kind of, I'm just going to go back into here. Does that make sense to people?
Yeah.
So it's an editing exercise, which is what this assessment is. You're writing a monologue with the verbatim text that you've got from your subject, and then you're thinking about what other source material into that monologue that might just give it some, I don't know, some flavor. And let's think about what kind of flavor it might offer. There's definitely, if I look at that Euripides text, there is something, oh, can you hear the train going by? There's something so great in that Euripides text of the contemporary next to the Greek, which is really fascinating. And so in this experiment, I don't know the answer to give you, but I do think there's something in looking at the kind of a paradox of style in terms of writing that might contribute to the monologue. Questions?
So using like any other piece of text to interconnect, like just whether it like explain their experience or describe it in a different way or adds another experience to it that could expand it, something like that.
Or maybe totally non-naturalistic.
Cool.
Maybe it's like, you know, I don't know, like something totally unrelated, or maybe it's something that's just repeated, like a single line repeated throughout the monologue that's come from somewhere else. You know, I know that Stacey last week was talking about if she was doing this assessment, she would interview this person on a cruise ship and then intercut it with their Facebook messages. Yeah, so I'm just thinking about what I don't have an answer for you in that it's an experiment for me as much as it is for you. When I first did this, I did this workshop, an assemblies workshop in New York, and they made us create a kind of, we made a play out of Days of Our Lives, cutting up Days of Our Lives scripts. But it was an entirely new play.
Yeah.
It was interesting. Yeah, so maybe, you know, download a Neighbours script and cut in, you know, a monologue from one of the characters. I don't know, like, yeah. And it doesn't have to be a lot. But it's just finding a way, when you get this verbatim text from your subject, it has that quality of naturalism. And I think it's really hard when you have this very naturalistic text to then go and do what we're asking you to do, which is make an experimental work, especially if you're going to use that text. It's easier if you're going to be like, okay, I'm going to make an image of something. But I think this could be an interesting way to make the text experimental and non-naturalistic. Yeah.
Cool.
So you've got a week to do a monologue. I'm going to do one too, and I'll upload it. I will put a place on Moodle to upload them. Do people feel confident sharing them with each other? I'm going to share mine. Might be share. But anyway, you have a week to do it. It will end up being part of your assessment, I'm sure, if it works or if it's good. And then we'll look at how we're going to deliver them or read them to each other next week. Cool. I think when I do mine, you'll get an idea. I just got to shuffle some words around. Yeah.
I have a question, like with just the I&E actual thing, and it may be a bit too specific to mine, but I don't know if other people may be having similar ideas. So our creative vision at the moment is primarily non-naturalistic, I would argue, and it's quite like at the moment it's non-verbal.
Great.
So is that, would you reckon, like, is that an all right approach, or are you going to be looking for a written aspect? Because at the moment, we don't have any desire to put written or like text-based.
I still want you to do the exercise.
Yeah.
It might, maybe, but I still think you should use your subject, and maybe it won't make it in, but maybe it'll be amazing and it will, you know? You don't know. Like,
and then I have another question which kind of stems from that one. The piece we're looking to do is less, or we had an idea where instead of presenting the person we interviewed, we're kind of presenting the emotion and her emotional trajectory.
Right.
So the character isn't physical, it's like the emotion of panic and the trajectory, so happy, fear, panic, whatever.
Yep.
And so you'd be embodying an emotion as a character, but not the physical person we interviewed. And is that a problem?
No.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, I think you can still do the physical development work.
Yeah.
In terms of even just the kind of embody that and try it out physically.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Someone just posted, can text be text like a poem or a song, or Stacey wrote it, or Facebook posts or other assemblages of words like a grocery store receipt or warnings on a prescription bottle. And yes, I love kind of a weird interjection of something would be great.
Is there any chance, if it's done, if you could put up yours first, or or maybe we can just look at the one that you're talking about, so that we have more of an idea of how that weird interjection actually plays out practically in the exercise?
Yeah. Well, also look at I can also post, or you can look at some of the ones that from Charles Mee, if you look him up.
Yeah.
Most of his stuff is a form of assembly, in terms of taking different materials from all over the place. Yeah. Sure. But I'll try and do mine quickly. Anyone else? Clear? Sweet. You've got my email. Email me if you've got questions or anything specific, or I've had a few proposals through from people that have been really great. Oh, yes, Halbo.
My name is Suzuki. So the problem my group has currently is the interview is actually really hard to find, because our topic is about a kind of like groups that's kind of isolated from the society, like
an
it's a really common social phenomenon in Japan.
Like, oh yeah, like the people who what are they?
So it's called hikikomori. So people who got really depressed from study or from work, and they just lock themselves in the room without meeting their parents or friends for probably 10 years or 20 years.
Yep.
And it's really hard to get into someone who's actually fit the categories of hikikomori. So we haven't decided who we're gonna interview. So that's a really tricky problem we have.
I mean, if it helps, do the interview by email. And I don't, if you can't get a hold of someone who fits that description, I mean, I know that there are lots of Japanese, well, not lots of, but there are other Japanese cultures or sort of subcultures in gaming and internet use and those sorts of things that also are about isolating yourself and sort of living in an online world or a different kind of world. So I'm sure that it's just about you have to be able to interview a person to do the assessment. So in the end, sometimes you have to make those compromises according to who you can get a hold of,
Okay.
You have to find a way.
Because I'm working with a Chinese student, so I think she doesn't really know much about hikikomori as I do. So we're still struggling with who and what question we're gonna ask for our interview.
I think it doesn't so much matter the questions you ask. You just have to find you have to find someone to interview, even if it's on email. I don't know if there are people that you can reach out to through Japanese friends or whatever that might be able to put you onto someone, or even someone who knows more about this kind of phenomenon.
Could you
Maybe.
I don't know. Could you potentially you could try and contact someone who knows someone who practices that phenomenon? Like for us, we so we had our idea and we wanted to look at panic buying. Instead of finding a panic buyer, we decided to find someone who knew a panic buyer or who had been directly involved in panic buying, or maybe someone who worked at a shop who got a lot of panic buying. Could you maybe approach your topic like that, if that is an idea?
We did consider that, but the problem is like I contact with several of my senior high school mates, but none of them really know this kind of person, because those people kind of like they withdraw from the society, so they kind of like hide from the public, so there's no way we can reach them.
I would say maybe you could use your research into that type of person as source material, and then find another sideways approach to that might be in like think of the show of Unwoman, and Mary Helen and my character in part 2 having very different points of view. So maybe there's a way to interview someone like one of your high school friends who doesn't kind of fit into that mold, and then have it like in opposition to what someone, I don't know, some research about someone who does. Does that make sense? At some point you have to interview someone.
Yeah.
So you have to, like, and if you can't find the person you want to interview, then you have to change your idea. It's just how it is.
Okay.
Yeah. But if you're really into that idea and you can't find that person to interview, you have to find a way sideways to get into it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So Stacey said you could find a character through documentary. I don't quite know what she means. Or how about you might need to change the topic slightly. Yep.
I'll think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, because it does rely on getting that interview and the verbatim answers in order to do that kind of editing work. Yeah.
I had a quick question if we have time.
Yeah, if anyone feels like they're good, you can go. But anyone who has other stuff, stick around.
Like, I was just wondering, just to clarify about like the interviews and stuff, because I was going to interview my director's mum, who's a teacher, and we were going to like do something along those lines, like about like teaching during a crisis and that kind of thing. Does the character that I portray need to specifically be her mum, or can it be just based off of?
Yeah, it can be based off of. Yep.
Okay.
So I think some people might choose to just become their subject, and some people might choose to go, I've got that as a source material, and then I'm going to become Patti Smith, you know, like, I don't know, like, or Nicki Minaj. I don't, yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I was hoping that we could just use that as like source material and then build further off of it.
Yeah.
But
it is just like the seed of
performance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, as far as that goes, it's similar sort of query. I'm again playing my partner, directing partner's mother who experiences chronic pain, and we're exploring that. And so I just kind of wanted to ask, like, how do you go about showing, like how would you go about maybe showing pain or physical pain that you not necessarily you haven't really felt? Sorry. Cool, thanks, Dad. That you haven't really felt or experienced, but you have to portray.
Yeah. With experimentation. So
Cool.
maybe there is a way that maybe you feel uncomfortable about, you know, acting that, and maybe that's a bit of a cliche to be like, oh, you know, like, or funny, like. So maybe there's a way to make an image that shows it. You know, I remember a performance from last year. It was just a very little kind of ditty that one of the girls did, where she had like used all these belts and she kept tightening them around her body. She just used one, but maybe you've got something like that. Like maybe you've got belts all down your body, keep tightening a loop. Or maybe you, I don't know, like smash something, or something that it's about. There is a real, do a bit of a brainstorm of like, how can I come at this sideways? And remember, it's not how you're feeling, but how you're making the audience feel. So what do you want to make them? So I think the question you have to ask is, what do you want to make them feel about chronic pain? Do you want to make them feel uncomfortable, or yeah, I don't know, but I think there's a way. I think look at image making. Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
And maybe brainstorm a whole lot of ideas.
Yeah, because as far as we've got, we're kind of playing with the idea of, you know, waiting in a doctor's, being in a doctor's waiting room, but experiencing pain, and so how long does it take to get a diagnosis, or being on like a 000 call, being like, this is what I'm feeling, I don't know what this is, like exploring like phone calls, explaining the pain to a doctor. Also just the different mindsets, you know, because of having different mindsets of having of like knowing it's never going to go away, or how does it affect you when you're younger, how do you like not being able to work. It's all very broad at the moment because we haven't had.
But I think there's ways to do it. To do it, that you're saying a couple things at once.
Yeah.
So an idea that brings to mind for me is like having to deliver something in a very normal way, and you know, but with that sense of pretending that this is not happening. And so maybe you could represent that in terms of an image that represents, you know, your body being tied in knots, but having to deliver, you know, your order to KFC in a very naturalistic way of like, oh, actually, could I please have? And meanwhile, you know, belts are being, you know, what, or, you know, you're being strung up by something and you're like, but you're still having to go, yeah, so yeah, no, it's really good. Hi. Yeah. Whatever that is. So think about ways that you can say a couple things at once. Yeah.
Sweet. Cool.
Anyone else with questions?